Welcome, everyone, and good evening. Thanks for joining us virtually tonight. My name is Maddie Walters, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm so pleased to introduce this virtual event with BRIAN Stelter presenting his new book, Hoax, in conversation with Juliette Kayyem. Through virtual events like tonight, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to you and others in our community during these challenging times. Every week, we're hosting events here on our Zoom. And as always, our event schedule appears on our website at harvard.com/events, where you can also sign up for our weekly email newsletter and browse our shelves from home. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time tonight, go to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get through as many as we can. In the chat box during this presentation, you'll see a link to purchase tonight's book online. All sales through this link support Harvard Bookstore, so thank you for your support during this trying time in community spaces like your local bookstores. You'll also find a link to donate in the chat box. Your purchases and contributions make this virtual author series possible, and now more than ever supports the future of a landmark independent bookstore. Thank you for tuning in support of our authors and the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings these last few months, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly. Thank you for your patience and understanding. And now I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. BRIAN Stelter is the Chief Media Correspondent for CNN Worldwide and anchor of Reliable Sources. Prior to CNN, he was a media reporter at the New York Times. His debut book was the New York Times bestseller Top of the Morning, which inspired the Apple TV Plus drama. He is also the executive producer of the HBO documentary After Truth, Disinformation and the Cost of Fake News. Juliette Kayyem is the Robert and Renee Belfler Senior Lecturer in Public Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. She was President Obama's Assistant Secretary for Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security. In 2013, she was named the Pulitzer Prize finalist for editorial columns in the Boston Globe. Tonight, they'll be discussing BRIAN's new book, Hoax, Donald Trump, Fox News, and the Dangerous Distortion of Truth, which was praised by Kirkus in a starred review as a deep, dispiriting dive into the nefarious intersection of politics, conspiracy, lies, and money. I'm so pleased to turn things over to tonight's speakers. BRIAN and Juliette, the digital podium is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And BRIAN, welcome to Harvard Bookstore. I have had the pleasure to meet BRIAN. I am an analyst for CNN, and we've met several times when I'm in New York, and the last time was when they shut down their studios. So it is good to see you virtually. And I've done many events for Harvard Bookstore, but this one is different. It is not just because it's virtual. It is also an important subject matter, and I judge that not only because of the topic and today's news or the author, but because both my parents and my in-laws are such huge fans of yours that they are zooming in from California and DC as well.
Hello, family.
Awesome. I know, so it's very rare. They're never that interested. No, they are. They're nice. The book Hoax.
We should take like a virtual picture together. You know,
I
like
know we should try.
We'll both smile and they can get a screen grab or something.
The book Hoax is not simply about a presidency or a network and their symbiotic relationship. It is also about the relationship, how that relationship impacted governance and governing. It is a deep and thoughtful reflection of the currents within American society today and how they created a deadly stew between a president, a network, and its viewers. It is about how major parts of a network influenced a president and how a president benefited from that, and not just because of what they reported or their primetime defense of the president, or even what they failed to report. They went further. They also undermined real news. And that is what BRIAN documents. It is also, surprisingly, an intimate book. You shouldn't view the book merely as a Trump book, but in some ways a memoir. I say this because it is in those first few pages where BRIAN tells us why he wrote this book. The first few pages open up with COVID. So BRIAN, I told BRIAN I was going to read just a few sentences because he's not reading tonight. Like so many Americans, Brian writes, I'm shocked and angry. So what you'll get in these pages is not the Stalter in a navy blue blazer that you see on CNN. I'm writing this book as a citizen, as an advocate for factual journalism, and as a new dad who thinks about what kind of world my children are going to inherit. This story is about a rot at the core of our politics. So we're going to talk about that rot. We will spend some time discussing what has alarmed Brian so much. And as is true for any book like this, it resonates today in the headlines. I was rereading the final pages of the book last night as I listened to CNN and Brian about the Bob Woodward story. It is also a week after a well-respected Fox reporter, Jennifer Griffin, validated an Atlantic story about how Trump talked about the military, calling them cowards and worse, and how the prime time shows on Fox either ignored or undermined her reporting. It seems like these two examples are a perfect place to start. So if you could explain, Brian, to the audience how Fox's response to both stories was sort of a model of what you documented.
Yeah, I think what happened with Jennifer Griffin is exactly why I had to write this book. So I want to say thank you to the Harvard Bookstore for having me. Hope I can come in person sometime soon. And thank you, Juliette, for hosting tonight. I like to think I'm your #1 fan, although I know you have a lot of fans. But whenever I see you on CNN, I turn up the volume. And that's like the measuring stick on television. Fox is really good at knowing how to produce television. So I start out by saying, you know, Fox News has some really appealing attributes. It is in some ways really compelling visually. They have great, you know, successful stars. The problem is then they misuse that power and misuse those production values and misinform the president and millions of people. And unfortunately, that happens on a regular basis. Trump today gained a talking point from Fox and Friends about Bob Woodward. The talking point on Fox and Friends was, well, if these comments were so disturbing, if lives could have been saved, why didn't Woodward report them right away? And an hour later, Trump tweeted it, and then he held a press conference to say it again, and now it's just going around and around in a loop. And that is what's happening every day. That roller coaster feedback loop is working really well. It's working too well. The roller coaster, or the amusement park ride, or pick your metaphor, the one that's broken is on the news side of Fox. So when Jennifer Griffin, a well-respected reporter, is able to confirm key parts of the Atlantic story about Trump insulting veterans, she went on the air, she reported it once, and then that was it. She didn't get back on again an hour later. She didn't get back on again 2 or 3 hours later. I mean, she did a couple times, but she wasn't on the way that CNN would have had her on or NBC would have had her on. Instead, it was Trump's denial of the story that was given the prominence on even above their own reporters' confirmations. And that is a strange and unique situation that kind of only happens at Fox right now. And it's because many of the folks at Fox News are not in the news business. They're in the stop the news business. They're in the deny the news business. And I think that matters because it affects the president and millions of other viewers.
Right, and that gets to the title of the book. Why I mean, we know that the president uses the word hoax or fake news, but why? What's the meaning of hoax? Because that was a powerful moment in the book.
Right, and originally this book was not going to be called Hoax. It was going to be called Wingmen. That was the deal. That was the book. The book was almost finished when the pandemic began, and the idea was Trump has wingmen on Fox News. Sean Hannity is one of his wingmen. But then Trump went to that rally on February 28th. And I'm trying to pull up the exact quote because I like to get this really carefully right. He said, the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. You know that, right? Coronavirus. He acted like it was a brand new term. They're politicizing it. He likened the Democrats' conduct to the impeachment hoax. And he said, this is their new hoax. Now, what Trump has always said since then is, I wasn't calling the virus a hoax. That's true. He didn't technically call the virus a hoax. He accused the Democrats of coming up with a hoax to hurt him by raising alarms about the virus. And then on March 9th, Sean Hannity said, "Oops, sorry, moving the home webcam." On March 9th, Hannity said the same thing. He said, this is like their new hoax. And I think both men, by saying that, they gave a sort of permission to their followers not to worry too much about the virus, not to worry too much. Don't focus on the medical aspects, focus on the politics. hate the Democrats. So in April, my book editor came up with the idea to rename the book, to call it Hoax. I thought it was brilliant. It's a dirty word. It's a malicious word, but it's a word Trump uses on average once a day in order to tell people not to believe their own eyes, not to believe their own ears. And as you know, since I'm grateful that you've read the book in full, like it begins and it ends with the pandemic. I think this year, this crisis is the best example of how the Trump-Fox feedback loop actually hurts Trump and could arguably hurt Fox, definitely hurts their viewers because they downplayed this disease early on. And in some ways they're downplaying it again now, which is another interesting layer to this. This story is not over. As you wrote in the Atlantic earlier this week, you know, the end of the summer is a moment where we think about what's going to happen this fall and winter. Fox isn't talking a lot about that. Well, I almost said Trump, I meant Fox. It's going to happen a lot. I mixed them up because they're so similar. Fox is not talking a lot about the virus right now. They're focused on other stories. And I think, again, that's a disservice to the audience. But I'm sorry for the long answer. That's why we called it hoax. It's because, you know, the president is using that word to destroy a shared common ground of truth.
Right. So I think, I mean, that totally comes off in the book, but there are instances where it's more than sort of misleading or sort of or not telling the story. So I mean, this was a jaw dropper for me that in a 2-month period, hydroxychloroquine, the HCQ, this thing that allegedly was taking, that was mentioned 500 times on airwaves in Fox, where, you know, the rest of the media is responding to the question. So arguably and then there's describe how that thing, this drug, goes from the airwaves into the Oval Office, because that's a phenomenon that is shocking.
And into the Oval Office repeatedly, not just through the president watching on TV, but also then bringing doctors who he has seen on Fox to the White House with the help of Laura Ingraham. This is a great example of how bullshit narratives, can I curse on this?
Yes.
These narratives they waste all of our time.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing I've taken from all of the coverage of the virus from experts like yourself about how to handle a crisis like this, it's that we should, the time is precious. We should not waste our time spending days talking about these drugs that have been debunked. So what happened is in March, a couple of guys put a Google document together. It looked pretty official. It made it sound like this was a real possibility. Maybe HCQ really could be a miracle sort of intervention for COVID-19. So it went from this Google doc, just 2 guys that put it up on the internet. Then it went to Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingram's shows on Fox. Within a week, Trump is talking about it because he heard it on Fox. And then within weeks, he's inviting Laura Ingraham and her favorite doctors to the White House to hype this drug, because Trump, this is the cool kind of crazy part, is Trump's trying to convince his own government officials like Stephen Hahn to take this seriously and follow up and take action. So it was a little scary. I remember in April, I'm in this kind of extra bedroom we were lucky to have in New York, because this is where I was doing all my live shots in April, just like everybody else, right? And I remember saying on CNN, when Trump was pushing this drug and Fox was pushing this drug, you know, my wife needs this drug. There are millions of Americans who take hydroxychloroquine, different names like Plaquenil is the name of what she takes, but same idea, same drug. She takes it for rheumatoid arthritis, others take it for other issues. And people were getting worried about it running low. People were worried about a run on the supply. I mean, this had serious consequences. Not to mention, if you take the drug and you're not prescribed it could hurt you, could die. So, you know, it's one of these examples of, I think what was really happening, if we get a little deeper, was Trump and his allies on Fox wanted to come up with easy solutions, right? The solutions to this crisis are hard, they're not easy, but they were looking for shortcuts. They were looking for quick fixes. And by doing that, and then by having Trump talk about it in public, and then by having you and me have to go on TV and debunk it, it wasted time. And that's why it's a shame.
Yeah, no, I think and then you think, I mean, I worked in agencies. I never worked in the White House. So I worked at DOJ and DHS. The amount of time that, you know, people are writing documents or refuting it across a lot of agencies because of, you know, the president's interest. So this sets up sort of what Hoax is and the relationship with Fox. So I want to just drill down on Fox a little bit, because that is, you know, I have an image of Fox that whatever, but it was really illuminating thing to me was how the trajectory of Fox News in the Trump era wasn't necessarily written in stone. That we sort of think, those of us who
Yes.
sort of caricature it, think of it a certain way. It was always conservative, but it didn't necessarily have to go this route. And then two events happened. Ironically, Me Too and the end of Roger Ailes, and then the Murdoch merger money interests that were in some ways sort of led Fox where it was. So just describe those other currents that have less to do with Trump, but they're sort of pressuring Fox to sort of, join the bandwagon.
Right. There's this alternative history that we can obviously never write, which is, what if Roger Ailes had not been forced out of Fox? Take it back even further. What if Roger Ailes hadn't abused his staff and abused his power?
Yeah.
What if he hadn't been a sexual harasser? What if he hadn't then been forced out by the Murdochs? What if he had still been running Fox when Trump took office?
Yeah.
A lot of staffers at Fox, and this gets to why I wrote Hoax, because so many staffers were confiding in me about what's changed at Fox and what's gone wrong. A lot of them said to me, if Ailes were in charge, he would have stood up to Trump. He wouldn't have allowed Trump to take over the channel. He wouldn't have allowed this perverse incentive structure where all the hosts are trying to one-up each other to be Trumpier and Trumpier and Trumpier. It's just fun to say, but it's not good for the country. And so we'll never know, of course. Ailes was forced out in July of 2016. He needed to go, given all the abuse. And then he died in May of 2017. But that is number one. That's number one. He left a leadership vacuum that then Trump was able to fill. And I think you know better than I about what happens in these organizations of large and small, where there's a leadership vacuum, and people are afraid to fill it. Nobody fills it, or and so Trump's able to take advantage of that and exploit that. I think the other factor is, as you mentioned, the Murdochs and this focus on the business, focus on getting deals done, focus on government, getting hopeful favors from the government, or really positive treatment from the Trump administration. There was this mutually beneficial relationship between Trump and the Murdochs that I don't think has been fully explored, which is why I tried to go into it in detail in Hoax. And the Murdochs never talk about this stuff. They never really talk about their relationship with Trump. I wish they would. And so I tried in the book to talk with sources in and around Murdoch's family. One person said to me, Rupert, the patriarch, he's always wanted a relationship with an American president.
Yeah.
He's never had a close relationship with a president before. I can understand why that might be, enticing or exciting, but to what end, right? To what end is it being used?
Yeah. So there's all these interesting characters in the book. The one that we know the best is Trump. So I want to start with him in the sense that he has a relationship with Fox News well before he ever announces. He has the Monday mornings with Trump, and then you have the Donald from Queens call-in show. So what did Trump learn by those years that makes him so effective today? What was that relationship like?
I think this is so critical. I think this is the part that I didn't appreciate when it was happening. When Trump came down the escalator, I didn't realize that he had spent 4 years on Fox getting to know the Fox audience. He was being asked questions every week on Fox and Friends. Not hard questions, but he was getting asked about what Fox's priorities are. So he's being asked about Benghazi. He's being asked about immigration and the wall. Like every week, it was like going to school to learn about Fox, right? If you get called every week and you get interviewed, you're going to learn about what the interests of your interviewers are, and by extension, what the audience is interested in. And that's why he was able to become the Fox News candidate. And I think that's why he was able to become the Fox News president, is because he was getting schooled by these weekly phone calls on Fox. I know people like to say it was The Apprentice. It's either The Apprentice that gets credit or blame for Trump's election. I get that The Apprentice was important, but I think Fox and Friends was more important.
Yeah, that really, that for me, as someone just new to all of this, that to me was the surprising, just and the extent to which Fox and Friends is we're going to get back to Fox and Friends, but just that relationship was so big. So you have management, which is incredibly weak, and you mentioned Suzanne Scott. There's no standards department. No one's pushing back on Trump. You have Trump, who's either receiving this or the information of what he should say, or basically they're defending him all the time. Before we get to the talent, I want to get to the audience. So we have some sense of the average Fox audience, but when I say that the book is deep and thoughtful, you really try to understand the Fox audience. So talk a little bit about that and you know, asymmetric polarization, replacement theory, all these, you know, this, I was like, these are Kennedy School words, but like, you know, just how is the audience, what's the audience like?
Right, there's definitely asymmetric polarization in action, meaning right-wing voters and viewers have moved further to the right than left-wing viewers and voters have moved to the left. That has absolutely been proven in paper after paper, and you can see it on Fox in the stories they cover. But I think when we talk about the Fox audience, you know, we're talking about our neighbors, we're talking about our family members, and I want to be respectful to the folks who feel Fox is like a family, because it is like a family in some ways. It does have that kind of that familiarity. You know, Fox is like an identity for many of its viewers, and its stars are like family members. And we have to appreciate that if ever there's going to be a kind of reckoning with the content where I can credibly say to the stereotypical uncle or aunt or the stereotypical grandpa or grandpa, you know, what Sean Hannity's telling you doesn't reflect reality. Like, they've been on this narrative lately about, you know, the cities being hellholes and New York on fire and Portland, you know, being invaded. You know, New York's okay. We're going to get through these challenges. We're going to be okay. Like, what they're saying about New York does not match reality. But for me to convince Fox fans of that, I need to meet them where they are. And so I think we got to understand Fox is more than a channel. It is an identity for people. And the viewers who really love the channel, they feel like nobody else speaks to their concerns and their identity. And so that's important to recognize, I think.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you talk about this fear of replacement. So like, explain that, like what is that Laura Ingraham particularly plays really well into?
Well, I think that's at the heart of a lot of this, which is white identity politics, right? Concerns about, it's what Van Jones famously said on the night of the election, white lash.
Yeah.
You could think of Fox as the white lash channel, right? This identity being whiteness, this fear of a multicultural America. Fox represents the backlash to a more multicultural America. And you can see it in the ratings. During the funeral for John Lewis, Fox's ratings fell off a cliff. And when the Democrats stopped speaking, the ratings came right back up. That happens a lot when there are big Democratic events in the country. Although I didn't think about John Lewis's funeral as a Democratic event, I thought of it as an American event. Go figure, go call me crazy. But that happens a lot. That dynamic is very real. And I think Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham represent it the most. They play most with the fires of white identity politics. But those notions are suffused throughout the channel in terms of the culture war stories, the conspiracy theories. It's about preserving white Christian conservative America. And it's not that that's not important and that those feelings are not real. It's just that I think these shows too often prey on fear and prey on this sense of being replaced. I mean, Robert P. Jones of PRRI said it better than I ever can. It's that everyone we were all at a table, and he says basically white Protestants controlled the table, Christians controlled the table, and now there's a new table, and everybody gets a seat, and Christians get a seat, and that's all these other, and that's a scary change for a lot of people. And I think we have to understand why Fox is so compelling to those folks for that reason.
Right. I mean, so because Charlottesville becomes a moment in which Fox basically gets Trump out of Trump. There are various moments where the path out for Trump is you know, laid by Fox News. So in Charlottesville.
That's a great way to put it. I like that.
Yeah, so in Charlottesville, they basically see what's happened, see the press conference of both sides. So what's their reaction? Because that's a moment.
Right. It's absolutely a moment. It's this moment where he is walked into trouble, and needs a way out, and Fox helps him out with talking points, with a counter narrative. But it was a remarkable source of tension within Fox as well. I write in the book that Charlottesville was a low point of the Trump presidency, and also for his Fox defenders. I quote a former correspondent there saying he watched in horror as his colleagues defended or stayed silent about what happened in Charlottesville. And ultimately, this reporter, Connor Powell, that's why he quit. He stayed for a while longer because his child was enrolled in school somewhere. And he was But he eventually quit because this is too much. I don't want to be associated with this channel. There's another host, Clayton Morris of Fox and Friends Weekend, who went home, and his wife had to talk to his son about Charlottesville, and they had Fox News on, of course, at home. And the child asked them, is daddy a white supremacist? And for him, that was it. Clayton Morris quit. He never said why. He never revealed the real reasons. He just left. But a lot of people at Fox have had those breaking points, right? Shep Smith, famously, very visibly, but also Megyn Kelly early on, and Carl Cameron, Catherine Herridge. There's a lot of people who have left Fox, and they don't make a big fuss about it. They don't make a lot of noise about it. But there's been this exodus of talent from people who feel they can't toe the Trump line, or they don't fit in there anymore, or they say the place is not journalistically sound enough. And here's the issue. It's hard to replace those people. Fox usually can't replace those people. And so what happens? The channel gets Trumpier and Trumpier and Trumpier. And so we're in this kind of vicious cycle where the propaganda on Fox is winning and the news is losing.
Right, that comes off.
I hate to be a downer, Juliette.
No,
Sorry
that comes off. Don't worry, my last question is gonna, no, but I mean, that comes off in particular, and a lot of us know him, the Shep Smith chapter, the sort of transformation of someone who thought, I can hold the line here to a switch, and basically wasn't defended by the network. But there's another interesting, the book is filled with so many people that you know, and now you get the background story, or you know. So what happened to Judge Napolitano?
Oh my goodness, this story I think is kind of sad, because I'm a big fan of his as a viewer. I think Judge Napolitano is a great kind of larger than life figure on Fox News. So he's been there since the beginning. He was hired by Roger Ailes. He used to be a judge in New Jersey. He still uses the judge title on the air. He's been friends with Trump ever since the day they met at Roy Cohn's funeral. Can you imagine that? They sat next to each other at Roy Cohn's funeral. They were friends ever since. Napolitano is this libertarian lawyer, right? He wants the government to stay the hell out of your life and out of your bedroom. But in the Trump, and he was with Trump at Trump Tower during the transition, talking about who to pick for the Supreme Court, you know, all that kind of friendliness and coziness. But then when the judge calls out Trump and points out, you know, yes, the Mueller report's a real problem. Right. Yes, there's evidence of coordination with Russia and Trump. Yes, this looks fishy. And then with the Ukraine scheme, yes, there's criminality here. Yes, the president's committed impeachable acts. He's just, I mean, in the view of I think most folks, he's just telling it like it is. And for that, he was punished by Fox. And for that, he was punished by Trump. And all of a sudden, Trump is tweeting nasty barbs at the judge and insulting his longtime friend. And of course, others at Fox noticed this, right? And this gets to the incentive structure. Do you want to poke your head up? Do you want to call out Trump? Do you want to point out what's going wrong? Well, he's going to tweet about you, and producers at the network are going to stop booking you so much, and you're not going to be on TV as much. And when you work in a TV network, airtime is oxygen, right? And I think the judge told some of his friends he felt like he was being boxed out, and because he wasn't pro-Trump enough. Right.
And yeah, to sort of silence without getting fired. But so now the primetime lineup. Oh, Brian, we lost you there. Now the primetime lineup. So the book is also, it's about Hannity. I mean, it really is. It's about the shadow chief of staff, how he is both driving an agenda and then also defending Trump. There's no, as you know, there's no analogy to the extent of their relationship. So if Hannity turned on Trump, would the audience go with Hannity or Trump?
You're going to make me spit out my coffee just thinking about the idea, the possibility of Hannity turning on Trump. But no,
it's more. What is this relationship? It's odd, and it's weird.
I tend to think that Fox has more power than Trump. So my initial reaction to your question is, I think the viewers would side with Hannity. But no, I don't think it's that simple. I think it would be very split. I think there would be a lot of noise and uproar and outrage and some people would attack Hannity for being a secret plotter of the deep state. Like, it would be ugly. But the initial reason I say Fox has more power than Trump is because time and time again, we've seen that stars come and go. Bill O'Reilly gets pushed out. Megyn Kelly quits. People come and go at Fox, but the network gets stronger than ever.
Yeah.
In that scenario, is Trump just another one of the network's stars? And if he were to go or be lost or lose support or lose his election, would Fox just move on? And I think the answer might be yes, but it's so hypothetical. I think the frustrating thing about Hannity is that he has this incredibly important relationship with Trump and doesn't talk about it, doesn't admit that Trump, there I go again, Trump and Hannity, that's the same person. Hannity doesn't admit that Trump is his #1 anonymous source.
Yeah.
Hannity doesn't describe his private advising of Trump. He likes to say to people like me, nobody knows the truth about my relationship with the president. Okay, tell us. You should disclose that to the president. If Trump called me for advice, I would tell my viewers the next day.
Yeah.
First of all, I would try to turn that into an interview and I try to ask him questions. But the point is, when you are being treated like a shadow chief of staff, you should talk about that. And Hannity doesn't. But instead, to his friends, to his colleagues, he says, Hannity, Trump is so stressful. He's like a run-on sentence. He's crazy. He talks about Trump the way so many other people do, but he says something very different on the air.
Yeah. And I mean, the point you make is that it's quite possible that it was Hannity's frenzy with Ukraine which led to the impeachment. What was that craziness about? Like, I mean, in other words, it's not like Fox is always right. They're just they just want an alternative news story.
Yeah, think back to 2017 when Robert Mueller was appointed, and DC was on fire, and according to CNN, there were folks in the White House researching impeachment procedures. Like, it was crazy time, May of 2017. So what did Hannity do? He needed to change the subject. He needed to change the story. So he held up this story from Politico that said there were some individuals in Ukraine that tried to mess with the election by trying to denigrate Trump and promote Hillary Clinton. So that's obviously very different than having a Russian state-sponsored attack on an election. And Politico said that. Politico's story was very carefully worded. But Hannity, of course, ran with it like it was, this massive scandal. What he was doing was he was creating a false equivalence, right? He was taking something small and blowing up to be a Macy's balloon in order to distract from Trump and Russia and Robert Mueller. And I think when we look back, we can see the seeds of the Ukraine scheme. And why was Trump so distrusting of Ukraine? Why did he believe that something was afoot, right? This happened again in March of 2019, where Hannity had people on his show attacking Marie Yovanovitch, claiming that Marie Yovanovitch was this deep state agent who hated Trump. And this creates a mess inside the State Department. And that's a domino effect that we can pretty clearly see leads us down to the July phone call with the Ukrainian president. So the argument I'm making in Hoax is when Hannity's trying to help Trump, he is hurting Trump.
Yeah.
I think the best example of this is in the pandemic. Let me just mention this in March of 2020. Makes me so fucking mad to bring this up, but it's true, okay? So Trump is calling Hannity saying, how are my ratings? How are we doing? How are our ratings? And it makes me crazy because, we were losing Americans at that point. We didn't know how many people were dying because we didn't have the tests, but the country is in crisis. We're on a war footing. New York City is trying to find more beds for patients, and Trump is calling, asking about his ratings. Now, so what should a friend do? What would I do if I were your friend? I would say, Mr. President, don't you ask me about that again. Don't bring it up again. Don't ask about your ratings. Please don't tweet about your ratings. Sir, if you tweet about your ratings, but instead, that's not how it went down. It's not, and this is ultimately, this is how Trump's friends do him a disservice. They feed his ego instead of trying to help him lead the country. It's a bummer, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
That's
I mean, it's,
I try
I mean, and I think
to
that
relax about it.
right, no, I mean, I
Come
think
on,
it's,
man.
well, that's what right, exactly, the biting, come on. The last two questions I have are sort of the sort of big picture ones, which is, you know, as you know throughout the book, it's not just, you know, the craziness and the fake drugs and the, you know, whatever, and the protecting him from, you know, the lawsuits and stuff like that. It's that they're also focused on, you know, that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4. Like, don't believe what your eyes are telling you, right? So it starts with Sean Spicer and, you know, what you're seeing with your eyes, you know. So is there a way out of this, or maybe better way to put it is, has Fox and Trump, this is going to sound horrible, and I don't mean it that way to audience members, but
Good.
Did COVID expose the limitations of the Fox Trump? You know, you at one stage also call it the Fox Trump temp agency, all the people going in and out. Is there a way out?
Yes. By the way, I just turned around for a second. You want to see how fancy I am? I got my on top of my bed. I have my my fancy lights. You know, I took the
I don't want
lights and I laid them on the bed.
As your Homeland Security advisor, I would like you to lift the light from the bed. Is it safe?
I know, so it doesn't light on fire.
Yes,
I know,
exactly.
I needed to light the room. I'm gonna light the room really fancy. This is me. But the reason I was turning around was to get a copy of the other big one-word book about Trump right now, Rage. Because I just started reading today, because you know what happens is these book publicists, they send out early copies to reporters. They try to seed them all around so that a few of us have copies. So mine came today. Here's what was on page 45 that I thought was really interesting. It's talking about Rod Rosenstein and, you know, Rod's relationship with the president. And he says Rod moved into his office. He saw a new flat screen TV. My God, he said to himself, I'm not watching television on the job. And he unplugged it. And then he says, aware of Trump's obsessive TV watching, he thought he would like to advise the president, turn off the TV and run the country.
Yeah.
That's great advice. Obviously not taken, but that's great advice. I have people at Fox, at the upper levels of the company, say to me, I wish Trump would watch less TV.
Yeah.
Right? And I thought that was ironic or hypocritical given how they benefit. But I mean, things like that are solutions to the issue, right? If he were not consuming so much of this, it would not be so front of mind for him. There wouldn't be this obsession. He wouldn't get misled by Fox and Friends and Hannity. And he might not tweet as much. You know, there are some solutions. I think what happened, and I don't know if you had a moment like this, I had a moment like this in February of 2017, where I thought Sean Spicer and Ryan Priebus were going to be the adults in the room.
Yeah.
I thought Hope Hicks would be an adult in the room. And then the day that Trump tweeted the fake news is the enemy of the people, I realized I can't trust any of them, because if they couldn't stop him from that kind of hateful smear, then they're not going to turn off the TV for him. They're not going to take away his Twitter device, you know. But I think the answer to the question is, if there were adults in the room, and if there were responsible individuals, and if they did say to the president, it is not in your interest to binge watch TV, wouldn't that make a difference? Or is that just so crazy and impossible that
it's impossible, because he's, you know, that's just sort of like, will he be the adult, right? And we've been waiting 4 years. Nothing drives me more crazy. I'll admit this, when I'm on CNN, when another analyst will say, the president should, and you're like, 4 years later, you still think he should? Like, he's not going to. Okay, my last question is actually a quote from your book. You quote someone who's talking about the talent, the management, the revolving door at Fox. And the person said, Fox is not immoral, it's amoral. Do you agree with that now after COVID?
I think I do. Is that the wrong answer?
I know, whatever you, I mean.
Here's the longer answer to that.
Yeah.
Here's the longer answer to that, right? Any television network, CNN or Fox or MSNBC or whatever, they're all a collection of individuals and people and personalities and low paid production assistants and way too highly paid stars and a lot of people in between. And there's a lot of people that are trying to do their best in a tough situation. You know, there's folks at Fox going into the office right now, getting hazard pay, you know, because they're working in the office when everybody else is working from home. There's a lot of good people there. And I'm not going to sit here and say they're immoral. There's a lot of people who care deeply about their morality and doing the right thing. I just think they're in a system that is a little bit corrupted right now. There's been this form of collusion between Trump and Fox where they want to make the channel Trumpier and Trumpier and Trumpier. The content moves in that direction, which means downplaying the pandemic, which means pumping up these drugs that have been debunked to be effective with COVID, which means focusing on other stories and not focusing on this disaster. And they're in that system, and some people would say they're stuck in that system and would like to leave. Others would say they're in that system and they want to make it better. And others would say, screw you, Brian, you have no idea what you're talking about. You're a left-wing hack. We're doing the right thing. We're trying to save America, right? There are true believers at Fox as well, who I have less sympathy for because they are ignoring the behavior of a serial liar and not calling it what it is. I always say that if Trump woke up tomorrow and told the truth and said the sky was blue, not green, we would applaud and report the news. But if he keeps saying the sky is green, we're going to have to keep covering it. And by the way, if Joe Biden wakes up and starts saying that it's raining when it's sunny, we're damn well going to call him out too if he's elected, you know, now and if he's elected president. But, you know, my point is there's a lot of people there, a lot of different motives. I don't want to paint with a broad brush. But I think we need to understand the incentives and the motivations of these staffers because they have tremendous power. And unfortunately, it's often used wrongly.
Yeah. Okay,
poorly.
Yeah. Brian, thank you.
Now, I see
so
we've
much.
got questions. Look
We've
at
got
us.
lots of questions, so I think I'll just read them to you so you can just listen. And we got a bunch of questions. I'm going to start. The first one's for me. I'll type my answer.
Good. Oh, good. No, let's do it. I like that. I can take a breath.
We're switching the tables now. I'm like on reliable sources.
For Juliette, what specific facet of a 2020 Trump presidency frightens you the most?
A re-election. I mean, I think it's all horrible. Lots of people are dead. I think amazing things have also happened because of this president. I think a reckoning on race, a realization of multiculturalism, an understanding of the environment, all these other things that like now are very pressing because we have such a incompetent and scared. I think Trump is scared of the virus. In other words, I think his reaction is I'm absolutely terrified. I think that seems consistent with a lot of his behavior as well. So, you know, the courts, we have conservative judges, a lot of this stuff will last a long time. A lot of the other stuff is just regulations or fake, you know, he pretends like he's doing something he doesn't. I don't know if the systems can hold another 4 years though. That is what worries me. So I think that's, you know, and I talk to enough people in the intelligence and security agencies that they can hold on. You know, about 2.5 years ago, they said, I can hold on 4 years. I can't hold on 8. So that's, okay, that's my answer, but this is not, okay, anyway, now, anonymous attendee.
No, I like that. That was like this, welcome back to Reliable Sources. I'm Brian Stelter. All right, I'll stop, okay. All right, back to me.
Okay.
You take it.
Anonymous attendee asks, it's a great question. So thank you for your incredible work and your book, which is the first Trump book I actually bought. Wondering why in the fallout from Bob Woodward tapes and the disinformation that has killed Americans, why Fox is not being called out as much as it should be. I'm not opposed to Trump being utterly exorciated, but he had help, and together they are guilty of murder.
I hope that's not true. The way I say it in the book is, you know, we will never know how many lives could have been saved. You know, it's one of those unknowables that's so upsetting, so disturbing. But I think the problem in the White House coverage that I often see, and I say this in Hoax, is it is true that there's all these times we talk about what Trump is saying and doing, but we don't link it back to why he says it or where he got it from. And it is often, usually Fox, and so that is why I wrote it. I think Woodward, from what I've, you know me, this is typical me. You know what I do with a book? I read the ending last. I read the epilogue, which is really strong in Woodward's book because he basically says Trump is not the man for this job.
Yeah.
And then I read the acknowledgments. And then I go through the index and I start looking up people's names, and I looked up Fox News. And I think he does do a good job in Rage of showing Fox's influence. Yeah. I think, if I may say, I think the two books are a good pair. And I'm glad that I've got a few more days before his is out so people can read Hoax. But I do think that we've got to understand the feedback loop. It is new. It's not like White House reporters were used to doing this in the Obama years, because Obama liked to watch ESPN when he had a time to relax. Like, he wasn't watching MSNBC or CNN and getting ideas for what to do. He was watching basketball. And so that this has taken some getting used to, right? Yeah. And it took me a little while to get used to it. It took everybody a little while to get used to it. But now we know how it works. We know the pattern. We know where he gets his talking points. And I agree with the questioner. We do need to keep linking it back and explaining where his rhetoric and where his actions and where his inactions are coming from.
Right. And to anonymous attendee, you must absolutely read the book, or I guess you already have, because
Brian,
So Brian describes, as Fox is saying, hoax, hoax, hoax on the virus, the Fox management is clearing out their studios and cleaning them and sending everyone home. So you get a sense of that sort of weirdness. Okay, from Wendy, CNN bears some responsibility for all of those countdowns to Trump rallies, to covering the Trump rallies. What can the media do to stop covering Trump and start covering Biden and his plans?
I think that the more important thing is that we cover both and that we're fair and we're even about it. And, Biden may hold fewer events, which makes it a challenge. But he has been ramping up lately, and he had a big interview with Jake Tapper today, which I thought was really important because, Biden hasn't really been taking a lot of questions. He hasn't been very accessible. That's a problem. And I think he's addressing that and showing that he can take on anybody and can get ready for the debates. The rallies is an important point, though. It's a very important point. This was a problem in 2016. CNN boss Jeff Zucker has acknowledged that we showed too many of those live rallies, wall to wall without filters. And he says it won't happen again. Trump is having a rally as we speak. So I'm glad you all are willing to watch this and not him. Kudos. And I think this is a big difference from 2016. CNN is not showing it live. I don't think MSNBC is either. I'm not sure about Fox. What I think is really amusing is that even Fox sometimes interrupts the rallies and cuts away. And that is a big change from 2016.
Yeah, and the fact-checking, the live fact-checking that both MSNBC and CNN have gotten good with. I didn't see the second part of the question, but I think this is one that a lot of us do experience, which is, how do you, understanding the Fox viewer, how do you talk to the Fox audience, of which the questioner says, of which my uncle is one. But in other words, did you get a sense of, are they, do they understand the lies, or is it just the cocoon that's very hard to penetrate?
I think not all Fox viewers are created equal, in the same way not all Trump supporters are created equal. I remember going to his rally in 2018, seeing folks in the front row who were like groupies at the concert, but then people in the back row who were just there to see the show. And so I don't want to lump everybody in together. Fox has a hardcore loyal base that only trusts Fox. Then those are gorgers. They're gorging on Fox. But then there are a lot of grazers who are just turning it on, checking in, seeing what's going on. And those people are probably more persuadable. I quote Mo Elliothy in the book. He's a Democratic contributor on Fox who used to not ever go on the air, didn't think it was smart to go on Fox. Now he says, I need to be on as a Democrat to show Fox viewers that I am not the caricature that Sean Hannity says I am. And I think that is a persuasive argument. I'll be curious to see if Biden ever interacts with Fox besides at press conferences. I doubt he'll give an interview between now and Election Day, but he is going to be at that debate with Chris Wallace. Chris Wallace is the first moderator of the first debate, and that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. So I want to loop both Paul, who I lost, let me get up to Paul and Donna's questions, because it's a scenario, different scenarios in November. And there's the third scenario that we don't know, or there's, fighting in the streets. But if Trump is reelected, does Fox get Trumpier and Trumpier? Or is, can you imagine what it is? if he loses and Fox no longer gives him a public platform or it's limited, do you see Trump creating his own propaganda channel?
Right. So I'm of the view that Fox is more powerful than Trump, and that if he were to try to launch his own channel, it would be a tough slog. It's really hard to get distribution on cable television and satellite television. These companies are going the other direction. They're trying to drop channels, not add channels. And the mere idea of adding a Trump channel would cause immense controversy, protests, boycotts, etc. He might still try, but I'm skeptical. He could try to get a show on Fox. That would be another way to go, right? Get in bed with Fox instead of trying to fight them. That seems like a more logical scenario to me. But here's the question. Does Fox want to be in business with a loser, right? Yeah. Because if this election goes the way the polls show right now, and it's not a close outcome, and there's not this terrible fight, there's not this awful democratic crisis, then maybe he's not going to have that much power to say, I should have a show on Fox. But I don't know, is that crazy, Juliette? Am I wrong? Maybe Trump's going to have a tremendous amount of power because he's going to say rigged, 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 stolen, 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 hoax, hoax, hoax over and over again after the election.
Yeah, I mean, we've played through all, we played through all the scenarios, and I both predicted, that Trump would get the nomination. I thought Hillary would win, but, I think, as I said, I think Trump is, scared right now, and will be incredibly weak when he loses. And I think that the institutions, I know the Republican senators don't care. I think the internal institutions are sick of him. And so I don't, will the military keep him in power? No, I mean, I think that what I want, on January 20th, if Biden's president, January 20th, 2021, I'm saying it here, that man is not showing up to the inauguration if he loses. No way.
Oh,
of course not. And don't be surprised, people. Come on. Okay.
I think what you said about institutions is really important. Can I add to that?
Yeah.
One of the institutions is Fox. And I think we should view Fox separate and apart from the other television networks.
Yeah.
Fox has a really well-respected decision desk, professionals who call and project races for a living. They are not going to screw around.
Right.
They're not going to be swayed by Trump's tweets or hate speech. But what will Sean Hannity do? What will Tucker do? What will Laura do? There could be a divide between the news side and the propaganda side. And in this scenario, Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch have a huge responsibility. So I think we should view Fox as one of those institutions.
Right, that's interesting.
And put the pressure on now. Because look, Juliette, we know CNN's not going to screw around. We know CNN will just tell the truth. We're going to count the votes. We're going to be very careful. We're going to have a week-long event of coverage. It's not going to be election night. It's going to be election week. Right. We are prepared for that. What will Fox do becomes an interesting question.
Yeah. No, and in some ways, if you think about it, if they put Chris Wallace there, that's a very different image than if they put, Sean Hannity. And talking about Sean Hannity, you touch upon this in the book. And I thought, you're careful not to say there's a, causation between Sean Hannity fake news and the violence that we saw against some reporters or any of the violence out there. But there is there's a flirtation with violence, is that a safe way to put it, that you document in particular with Hannity, but to a certain extent also Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham. This is a question from Andy Green. Do you ever think, he's asking in your quietest moments, do you ever think of a way out of this? Like how as a society, can we evolve past these people who really do seem at times content to, Andy says, to burn the world down for the sake of ratings, but it's just to flirt with the idea of violence that others then, can run with?
I think we have to advocate for high quality information and reporting and discourage low quality information and propaganda. And that's a job for all of us individually in our own little ways. I know that I don't have a big way to change it, but I have a little bit of a way in my own community with my own family and in my perch on CNN. And I think collectively that can make a difference. It's not about saying you should watch CNN, not Fox, because I'm not saying that. I'm saying you should seek out the highest quality sources, challenge your priors, as opposed to, eat the comfort food every day. And I think it's important to know that in this context, most people see through the lies, right? Most Americans see through the fog machine. And what Fox represents is a really powerful base, but it's a minority. And so the reason I'm hesitating is I used to say, well, we have elections. Everybody agrees on the result. That's the purifying event where we can all have our views, but then we agree on the result of the election, and facts matter. But I don't know if that's what will happen this year.
Yeah. It's going to be a long election. I'm going to end. There's so many great questions, and thank all of you for being here. We're going to turn it back to Harvard Bookstore in 1 second. But I wanted to end with a question. There's a lot of people who are, in these questions are feeling this, as you can see. But Susan Reed makes an interesting point, which I thought we could touch on the Tom Friedman column today, and quoting Tom Friedman, that Trump's appeal is that many of his core supporters actually hate the people who hate Trump more than they care about Trump or any particular action he takes, no matter how awful. Do you see these as a larger aspect of Fox's strategy, the liberal elites, the people like you and me and others that they hate more than they actually like Trump?
Wow, I haven't read the Friedman column yet, and I'm going to read it now, and that's a remarkable passage.
Yeah.
To say that the media feed Trump supporters a daily diet of how outrageous this is or that is, what Trump's actions are so outrageous, but none of it diminishes their support because they're not attracted to his policies, they're attracted to his attitude, his willingness to skewer the people they hate and who they feel look down on them. I wish I could say to every Hannity viewer who, Hannity uses these clips of me and tries to attack me from time to time. Tucker did it earlier this week. I wish I could say to every viewer of those programs, I don't hate Trump.
Yeah.
I want him to do well, just like most Americans do. But what they are watching is a caricature of me, clipped and cherry-picked and plucked from the videos. And I think what Friedman's writing about is very real. It's this sense of, I like Trump because the right people don't like Trump. And when I say don't like him, I mean criticize him, fact check him, challenge him, hold him accountable. You get told every day for 4 years that the news is fake.
Yeah.
You get told every day for 2 years that everything could be a hoax. And that's incredibly powerful and incredibly alienating and sad. Yeah. Ultimately, it's sad because it's destructive, not constructive. But when I have those trolls from Hannity's show engage with me and I try to reply and I try to show that I'm a real person and not a caricature, I like to think it makes a little bit of a difference. I hope it makes a little bit of a difference to see that I'm a human being and not some joke. And that's why I give up my email address, and I'll do it for our followers here. I'm very reachable. I'm at bstelter@gmail.com. So for folks who had questions who we ran out of time, so please email me. Please let me know what you thought of the book or if you have questions about what we've talked about tonight. I would like to think, Juliette, that when you hear my kid cry, and I hope you all didn't hear it, but she doesn't want to go to bed.
It's okay.
I'd like to think that when you hear that, or when I talk on the air about the pain of this pandemic, I'd like to think that helps build bridges, not tear them down. Yeah. I know it's not a full solution to the problem, but I hope it's a partial solution to the problem. And I hope that there are a lot more helpers than there are hurters, a lot more people that are trying to help than hurt right now.
Well, on that optimistic note, I think it's a great time to, and that's so good. We're going to turn it back to the great, and thank Harvard Bookstore for having both of us. I think this is, it was just fantastic. And thank you so much for everyone for joining us. So I'll turn it back and thank you, Brian.
Yeah, a huge thank you again.
Thank you so much. I hope to visit you in Massachusetts Avenue someday soon. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, hope to. Thanks to all of you out there too. Thanks for spending your evening with us. You can learn more and purchase tonight's book, Hoax, through the link in the chat box. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, here in Cambridge, Mass., have a good night, keep reading, and please be well.
Thank you.